Hey everyone, welcome to Logtech Live. I'm Eric Johnson. I am a senior technology editor at the Journal of Commerce. And in my spare time, 2 times a month, first and third Friday of every month, I am host of this show, Logtech Live. If this is your first episode, as I generally say, you've picked a good one. I try to only have good guests. So if this is your first episode at any point at any given point in time, you will have picked a good episode to start with us. Today's is a great one. It's our last episode of 2023. Can you believe it? I can't believe how fast this year is going. If you're a long time viewer, thank you so much for supporting the show. I really do appreciate it. And looking forward to a even better 2024. So I am actually I'm supposed to be on vacation today. Can you believe it? This is how much I love doing the show. I step aside. I have the beach in Cancun outside of my window, right out here. And I pulled myself back into my hotel room just so I could do the show this week. So that's how much I love doing the show, how much I love all of you and for supporting it. But don't feel bad. I'll be back out on the beach in an hour. Do not worry for me. Last episode before Christmas. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate, and have a fantastic New Year. If I don't talk to you before then, couple things. I'll go quick. Don't have a whole lot of intro stuff today, other than to say TPM 24. Every single episode, it gets a little bit closer to being right around the corner. And especially when we get into the end of the year and the holidays and we lose a whole bunch of time just, spending time with family and trying to get away from work for a bit, it really goes fast. So the next episode I'll be joining you is early January. And by that time, we will be like 2 months out from TPM. So if you have not registered already, and would like to, you can use the code EJTPM25 to get 25% off a registration pass. And I definitely encourage you to do that, because this year's show, bigger and better than ever. If you haven't heard me talk about it, first of all, TPM Tech, the programming that I am responsible for and put together, is now integrated within TPM. So if you get a TPM pass, you also get everything that TPM Tech has to offer. And there's a whole bunch of other experiences that we're introducing this year. And probably the biggest change is that we have a brand new general session area with a cool networking area all in one new area of the Long Beach Convention Center that we've never used before. So when we say it's literally bigger and better than ever, it is not a fabrication. It is not an exaggeration. We are taking a much bigger footprint of the convention center than we ever have before. So we're really looking forward to welcoming everybody in the industry. So again, use that code EJTPM25 to get 25% off your pass if you haven't registered already. The other thing I wanted to highlight, the blended pledge. I talk about this a lot. Please support it. The link is up there in the comments. It's very easy. You can give $5. You can give $5 million, whatever you have in your bank account that suits you, or your company's bank account. Let's make this a like a corporate kind of support. So blended pledge really quickly helps support people in our industry who are not well represented on stage, especially at our events. A lot of times they get invited to events and they don't have the travel budget to make it happen. So the people like me invite someone, a woman or a minority that's not well represented on stage, and they aren't able to come because they don't have the internal buy-in and budget to travel. That shouldn't happen. So the blended pledge is raising money to help those people get the travel budget they need so that we have a representative group on stage. So definitely worthwhile. Definitely encourage you to support that, or get your companies to support it in a big way. All right, quickly, news of the week. I could talk about the Panama Canal, which we've talked about in past episodes. I could talk about what's going on in the Red Sea, right? Like I've been talking this week a lot with shippers about what is going on in terms of U.S. East Coast ports. Imagine you started using U.S. East Coast ports the last couple years because the West Coast was a little bit gummed up And then there was the ILWU negotiations. So you're like, oh, I'm going to diversify to the U.S. East Coast. Oh, well, now the ILA is sort of taking a hard line, apparently, on contract negotiations next year. So there's that to worry about. And then both the canals, whether you sail west from Asia or east, Trans-Pacific, all water through the Panama Canal, both canals are under a lot of pressure. Panama Canal's low water levels. Suez is facing a whole risk of threats. There's been just in the last 2 or 3 days, 3 container ships that have been targeted by Houthi rebels in out of Yemen. So yeah, never a dull day in supply chain. I'm not going to talk about that. This is a tech show. So I'm going to talk about a couple articles that I've done and one that my colleague did that are about tech. This one here is one that I just published, I believe earlier this week, about a range of software that's aimed primarily at freight brokers, but there's also some at shippers and some at small carriers that's out to democratize technology that previously only enterprise shippers really had access to. And I talked to 5 different companies for this, just the tip of the iceberg. I could have probably talked to 30 companies across those 3 customer segments. The sort of connective thread is whatever they're targeting, whatever process or product they're targeting, is it's all about providing a usable, very easy to implement, relatively low cost piece of software to a group, a customer segment, size wise, that never had access to these tools before. And we're just seeing this over and over. So very interesting kind of dynamic at play. Also, I focused on the truckload sector in this story, but my guest today is going to talk about a little bit about this on the international TMS side of things too. So the second story I wanted to highlight from my colleague, Terry Griffiths. She did an update on some coverage I've done on the Flow Initiative, the US DOT Flow Initiative, which is Freight Logistics Optimization Works. Very interesting initiative that's gaining traction. This story kind of updated where that program is in terms of recruiting shippers, especially to provide data, things like order management data, booking at origin data, to give a 4 to 6 week forecast of usage of capacity in U.S. ports, chassis availability, other sort of supply demand metrics that a shipper might use to kind of make a decision in their other system. This is not a TMS that the DOT is offering. This is sort of a real-time weather gauge. So you can decide, this is my go-to analogy, you can decide whether you need a windbreaker, a raincoat, a parka, or nothing at all, right? So that's very interesting, and definitely encourage you to look into this. And by the way, the guy who runs Flow is going to be speaking at TPM as well. So if you're interested in this and want to get more details about it without actually talking to them yet, definitely, and you're going to TPM, definitely catch that session on Monday, March 4th. So that will definitely be worth your time. So the last story I wanted to highlight was one that I did a couple weeks ago that looked at how 2 different shippers use the same software, in this case InfoNexus, and the same 3PL, in this case All Port Cargo Services, in different ways. One uses the 3PL to really sort of manage the software altogether, maybe at some point with the idea that they would take it on themselves. The other company, the other shipper, uses that combo of software and 3PL in a hybrid fashion with the intent to take on more and more of the management of the software themselves. So sort of that training wheels kind of idea of you the super user, help set me up, and eventually I will be able to take over more and more of this software that I've invested in. So to me, this was an interesting insight into the different ways that companies view kind of their investment into software, but also the extent to which some shippers really want control over the software they use, and others are very happy to have a 3PL that really knows how to get the best out of a particular piece of third-party software, and they're just happy to hand that off to another vendor, to 3PL to handle that software on their behalf. All right. Well, that is probably a good segue into my guest today. My guest is Wiebe Helder, who's did I pronounce that right? It's really hard for me to say. Is that Did I get that right,
Wiebe,
Wiebe?
Wiebe,
Wiebe.
Wiebe, almost.
I've known you for so long, I still can't pronounce your name right. God.
Most people don't, so it's okay. It's okay.
Wiebe. So, Wiebe is CEO of a company called Cargobase, and we met probably 4 or 5 years ago, and have been chatting ever since. Wiebe is a really interesting person with a fascinating background, which we'll get into in a second. Um, I had the fortune of being in Singapore, where you're based, a few months ago, and we had a great night of drinks and local food that I still remember really well. So, Wiebe, can you give us first of all a little bit of a background on yourself before we get into Cargo Base?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, originally from the Netherlands. I've been based in Singapore for about 18 years. Never I studied Asian business management, which has a bit of logistics, but never actually liked it or had any interest in logistics at all. Found it utterly boring. Happened to roll into logistics 15 years ago. Started working for a small regional freight forwarder who happened to start a new logistics department for emergency logistics, where I started as being operational in sales, and then actually in operations, and then a bit of both. Done that here in Singapore, in Europe, traveling around the world. So learned logistics really hands-on, doing things like onboard couriers, etc., to keep factories running, especially in the electronics and automotive semiconductor space. And yeah, really experiencing customs clearance with arriving in the US with 200 boxes going to Mexico and telling explaining to the customs officer how it eventually is gonna help the economy, etc., and all that stuff. Um, and while doing that, I received about 1,000 emails on my BlackBerry those days a day, and it was kind of I was not really at the idea that I was not really helping my customers by I was basically the first person they would call if they had an issue, and I could charge them whatever I want, and they had no choice because they were always firefighting. So I thought, okay, actually, what I'm doing is not really helping them, or at least I can help them better if I would actually, build a platform or use technology to actually for them to communicate better with the logistics service providers for procurement and freight management, etc. So that's 10 years ago, and now we're still here. So yeah, that's how we started it off.
Well, that is saying something. As I've, 2023 has been a interesting and somewhat difficult year for logistics tech as a whole. Not every company, obviously, but
Yeah,
I've had lots of conversations with people that most VC businesses are designed to fail, but also people forget most every kind of businesses fail eventually, right? Like
correct.
most,
Yeah,
it's a minor miracle when a business succeeds, right? So
yeah,
we should
yeah.
celebrate that. Um, so you kind of gave us a little bit of background on the initial kind of impetus for building the company. How is what you started out to build evolved into what Cargo Base is today?
Yeah, completely different than what I thought. Actually, I learned that when we started Cargobase 10 years ago, we started as a platform for e-sourcing platform for time critical, so emergency logistics. So
Yep.
we happened to have two customers that followed me in my new company in Cargobase and said, okay, we'll support you. Where we focused, okay, we just wanted to focus on freight procurement of air freight, time critical road freight, etc. So the sexy part of logistics, at least that's how I see it. And that eventually evolved into a freight procurement platform for even ocean freight and parcel, etc. Where I thought it was utterly boring, especially you book a shipment and you have 6 weeks to wait for a shipment to arrive. In emergency logistics, it's like you book it and I don't know if you go from a Singapore to the US, it might even arrive at the same time or even earlier, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a bit different pace that things are going at, and a bit maybe different stake some of the logistics requirements as well. And we when we started off, we thought, okay, we really want to build a platform that or technology that people like to use. Not only management likes to use, but actually that people in the factory like to use because they have to use it on a day-to-day basis and they have to use it to keep their factories running, right? So if a shipment doesn't arrive in emergency logistics, yeah, you put your factory may be down, or you put the factory of your customer down, right? And if you're talking about the OEMs in the automotive, putting them down is quite an expensive affair. So
Yeah.
we're really focused on, okay, it needs to work, it needs to be user friendly, and people need to see that they actually want to use it to change their existing process, because nobody likes change, and people in the logistics operations definitely don't like change. At least that's what I have experienced in the past. So it needs to be good. It needs to be for them. It needs to be have an incentive for them to change. And while we figured out that how we can automate these processes, it took a couple of years. We also figured out that people actually say, okay, we want to change, but actually might not change, right? So in enterprise world and in logistics, we've experienced that it takes time. And we were very early stage, right? So freight visibility, etc. were not even a topic back then. APIs, it was all EDIs, etc. And we learned from our customers what they actually wanted, and they wanted indeed. They wanted to have freight procurement, they wanted to have track and trace, they wanted to have invoice audit, they wanted to have data, they wanted to have analytics, etc., etc. And they wanted to have it on a global scale. So we started to add on features with our development team. And about 2.5 years ago, we had a discussion internally. It's like, okay, we're being invited by so many customers for TMS, but we'll reject them in the RFQs because we don't see ourselves as a TMS. We're more a niche player in spot buy, etc. And then we thought, okay, actually, what are the requirements to call yourself a TMS? And then we actually ticked all the boxes to go, okay, actually, we are a TMS. We might be a bit different, and we might have a different approach to things. But actually, we are a TMS, which we now offer as well. So we still have the e-sourcing, the freight procurement, which is actually a TMS for spot buy freight, for time critical and non-time critical. And then we have the TMS, which we call a TMS Lite, which is a simplified version of a transport management system for enterprise shippers.
And what is your customer base is shippers? What's the geographic footprint, and are you selling into? You mentioned the sort of difficult to get people to change. Are you selling into like a logistics director, international transportation type role? Is that?
They're really varied, because most of our customers are large enterprises, listed companies. So our platform is being used in over 50 different countries. So we are based in Singapore, but I would say less than 1% of our revenues are actually coming from Singapore. Majority is actually North America, followed by Europe. We're selling to a wide variety, because it depends on the business. We either sell to freight procurement or either operational people, logistics directors. It really depends. And I think what is also quite interesting, which I'm sure you'll have questions as well. The change what we're seeing in the industry is that the people that we're selling to is a complete different profile and has a complete different appetite than a few years back or 10 years back. 10 years ago, we basically had to direct people to say, you need to change, there is an issue, or it can be done better. Where now people actually say, we want to change. We know that we can do better. How can we do things better?
Interesting.
And I think that's the thing, is a bit of a different a different game.
Well, okay, so that's probably a good lead in actually to a question I wanted to ask, because we had an event in the US a few weeks ago, the JOC did that, where I had a session that was talking about, has TMS come back into fashion? And that was very much on a North American truckload, maybe a little bit of LTL kind of management perspective from the shipper perspective. And I think more broadly, I am seeing that shippers are talking more about TMS. I referenced that story that I did in the intro, right, about InfoNexus, which at its core is an international TMS. What do you think has made sort of TMS become a little bit more kind of fashionable? Not to the extent that like it wasn't being used for the last 4 years, but it didn't seem like people were talking about it in the same way that they were maybe 10, 15 years ago. And you obviously saw enough demand that you pivoted the business a little bit to cater to that. So what do you think happened?
I think the difference is that a few things. I think, first of all, resources are not cheap. So I think companies actually have realized that by the use of technology, they can actually automate a lot of the manual processes. Look, logistics or transportation is primarily rule-based. So if the rules are followed and everything goes according to plan, you could actually automate all these processes. Of course, a lot of people say like, yeah, but there's a lot of knowledge and know-how required, of course, to put these processes and these rules in place. But of course, and apart from that, you still require people to manage the exceptions, because there are a lot of exceptions in logistics itself, right? But I think that is primarily, I think the main reason is that people say, okay, we need to work more efficient. We want to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and how we can make it better. And I think COVID, of course, has put a spotlight on logistics that said, okay, people actually didn't know what they were doing. And when a curveball came their way, they had no clue what to do. So they needed standardization, they needed processes in place, and preferably actually processes that are automated. So I think that is actually something that has contributed it. Also, what we're seeing is that there is a new generation of supply chain and logistics professionals out there on the shipper side that is way more tech savvy, that wants to change, doesn't hold that. So when we sold Cargobase, we started selling Cargobase on the, but even before the TMS side, we were selling to people that were basically in their position for 25 years. They didn't have the appetite to change or whatsoever. We closed the customer a year ago that I've been chasing since my first day with Cargobase. But there was a person in place that didn't want to change. So we basically, that person retired, and now the new person said, oh yeah, sure, where can we sign? And we start in 2 weeks. So I think the people want to change. Those people want to change. And they expect and want to change much faster as well. I think that's also a bit of a difference, that people want to see results faster. They don't want to implement something for years before they can actually see an ROI, because people job hop much faster, right? If you implement something for 5 years, most people will change job every 2 to 3 years. So nobody's actually going to see an implementation for a project that takes 5 years.
Yeah. So another element that I find very interesting, having covered this space for now way too long, I won't even say how many years, is there is no shortage of domestic TMSs in North America, especially. I mean, it's kind of, I think a lot of people in the industry will chuckle when I think Gartner at one point said told me there's something like 1,000 TMSs if you consider, some that are offered proprietary ones by brokers There's a lot fewer on the international side, and many of the ones that are international are actually domestic ones that have sort of been refashioned to try to, account for some of the nuances of international shipments. Why do you think the aside from the fact that yes, the U.S. truckload market is several times the size of even the container shipping market, right? But why do you think there's been a relatively smaller amount of international TMS providers versus domestic TMS providers?
Because it's more complex. I think that's the big question, the biggest answer. But I think you're right. I think there are so many. If you look at the overall global location of all the TMS providers, I think most of are based out of the US for domestic market. Then you have Europe, and then there are only a few players actually that are in Asia. And they're still building domestic TMS. Right? I spoke to somebody yesterday who said they were going to build a focus on something domestic. So no, okay, you're not the only one. But there is, of course, massive demand. But I think what it is that there are global players, but the global players what do you say that? Their systems are rather complex, because with TMSs, there are different types of TMSs. You can go into an organization at a different level. If you have a TMS that you want to use all the bells and whistles, and you want to integrate in everything, if you want to roll that out, and let's say you have factories in 40 over countries, and every country has a different process, then good luck. That's going to be a massive undertaking, right? So I think that is what a lot of companies actually figured out, that if you want to have a TMS on a global scale, the process in India is different than in Mexico, than in Germany, than in Hungary, than in Australia, right? So if you want to be successful with a TMS that you want to roll out globally, you can only make it as complex and as customized on a local level as to at least to a certain level, to avoid the extreme complexity. And then the problem that a lot of the larger TMS providers have is that they are too heavy for most organizations. But most organizations don't know the players that can actually serve that that range below the big the famous brands in the TMS space, right? That are similar to the ERP players. So I think
And
that is the yeah.
I think getting back to that story that I pointed to at the beginning, that I think you sort of fit in that larger trend of kind of democratizing tech a little bit. Not to say that it's it's just going after the long tail, right? Like there's lots of enterprise shippers also that struggle to justify a huge investment in TMS, and it was getting to the point where the bigger players were only happy with high 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure deals, right? And
Correct.
that left a lot of people on the sidelines, both on the international and domestic side. And I think what's really interesting is there's just in North America, there's some very interesting small, at this point, small players that are growing pretty well because there's a huge appetite and there's a big market. And similarly, in internationally now, there's 2 or 3, 4 interesting companies that have kind of a unique approach, and maybe they're targeting a specific geography or a specific, they're specialized in Asia Europe trade or something like that. But there's just a lot more options on the market right now than there were 10 years ago. So really,
but I think it's also not. I think for the TMS itself, like in the past, it was. Like now you have all these sub-services available that as a TMS you can just plug and play, right? If you want to have visibility, you can plug it in here. If you want to have whatever, even the freight forwarders, etc. I mean, 10 years ago, all the freight forwarders, they didn't want to work with us. They didn't want to be on our platform. They had to be dragged by our customers to actually collaborate. And now it's the opposite. Now they come to us and say, hey, can we be on your platform, and can we integrate so we don't have to do everything manually anymore?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's also what the tables that are currently changing, where we're seeing that the shippers are getting more power again over the LSPs, logistics service providers, because
so
that's
this
the
is
thing, right?
That's very interesting, and we've addressed this on I've addressed this recently a couple different ways. That I've had people on the technology who are catering to 3PL space tell me that shippers are absolutely outsourcing innovation to their 3PLs, and that's they expect more and more out of those relationships than they've ever gotten. And I alluded to this before we jumped on. I think something that's interesting, you mentioned visibility. Something that's interesting to me is obviously we had this huge crush of demand for visibility tools during the pandemic that has now subsided a bit, and we've seen that manifest in a bit of tough times for some of the visibility providers out there. I remember in 2019 having conversations with shippers who said, I'm happy to pay for visibility as a line item right now, but long term, I either want it bundled in with my TMS or I want it bundled in with my 3PL what I'm paying my 3PL. I don't want to pay for a 3PL to do this and that. I don't want to pay for a TMS and then also have an extra cost. Like that should be part of the thing. So to your point about shipper leverage, I think that's how this is starting to play out again. And the pandemic was just sort of like a bit of an anomaly in that natural trend of where things are going from expecting, things to be encompassed within a 3PL arrangement or a TMS that they're using, right? And not a whole bunch of other things outside of it.
No, true, because you don't want to look. I think that's also. I think with the shippers, they'll review their tech stack, right? In terms of they don't want to have, 5 different tools to manage everything, while they can actually can do everything in one tool. I think that's the thing. And I think during COVID, indeed, during the pandemic, I think everybody was just in a different mode where they say, okay, we need to do something.
Firefighting.
And, to
your
correct. Yeah, firefighting, and the management want to see that we do something. Okay, so we can show on the map on the GPS location where our containers are, and that sounds awesome. And if we have to pay X for it, then it's okay. But but when things are tight again, then those are the things that probably are not that very important anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah, an $8 cost to track a container on a $12,000 spot rate
which I never
while you're
understood.
waiting for cargo to get on a shelf doesn't sound like a lot. Now, totally
No,
different.
too, but that's the thing, right? You can track your air freight on for free with the airline. You can track it for free with the freight forwarder, and then why we have to pay for container freight, right? I don't know if I've understood it, but okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's just me.
Well, okay. So I did want to get your, because
It's more than that.
we've
It's more
chatted.
than that for sure.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
We've chatted about this a bit over the years, and I don't think I think you have a pretty sober kind of approach to this relative to some people who are extreme, who I've had on the show, and who are
Yeah.
very anti VC in terms of feeling like it just doesn't match up with the needs of the industry. How are
Hmm.
you sort of looking at um, like the impact that VC has had on the industry? And is it two questions in one? Is it that VC hasn't invested enough in SaaS for the industry, or is it just that VC is sort of a not a great fit for logistics? Do you think?
Mm.
And feel free to
Well,
disagree with
actually.
that question, obviously.
Yeah, I know. No, so I think the VC itself, the investments that have been ongoing for the past few years, right? I think it has made it for some companies really hard because people that have raised the most money have the marketing budget and get all the exposure, right? And they get all the attention where some others actually don't have that. So we've raised some money, but we have not raised massive.
Yeah.
We go under the lean and mean motto. Before COVID, we were only with about 10 people. We didn't even need anybody in the US or Mexico to actually serve our customers there, where most of our customers are. But I think there is a massive opportunity still in SaaS. But I think it's probably the lack of knowledge that the VCs actually have of the industry, and also
Mm.
I don't know, especially the digital freight forwarding and all that stuff. That sounds so. That market opportunity is easier to quantify because there are actually figures on there, and there's actually already a market on there, right? There is not a
Yeah.
market for, let's say, there's a lot of the SaaS in logistics. It's a new market, it's a slow market, and it's not as sexy and not as fast moving, right?
Yeah.
We're currently where we're currently up with Cargobase is where I thought we would be after 1 or 2 years. But the industry doesn't change that fast, and I think a lot
It
of
moves very
companies
slowly.
have figured it out
Totally.
that you can have a lot of money and it burns quite fast. And when it's gone, right? So I think that's the thing in the industry. You can just not throw money at it because if people don't think they want to change, they're not going to change, right?
I don't think I cannot agree with you more on I think there's a debate to be had about the extent to which VCs understood the challenges from like a product and process perspective that could be solved. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's I think it's absolutely clear that they misunderstood how established the buying cycles and how slow the buying cycles in logistics are, and how they weren't going to change even if markedly better solutions and easier and cheaper solutions came on the market. That
Sure.
didn't really change the way that, and we've seen that like this year, right? It's
Yeah.
snapped right back this year to the way it looked pre-pandemic.
Right.
And that's it's very interesting the way you put it, that like, you know, what if that doesn't change, the burn cycle that also doesn't change at the same time, right?
Uh,
So
uh.
I think
But
that's
we're
what we've
seeing
seen.
now. Yeah, but I think we're seeing now is there is a change in the sales cycle itself as well. We're seeing that now with the new, for the industry has changed, right? Of course, I don't know how many billions have burned, but the industry has changed. People have changed as well. They are more open for technology. They're open to change. They're way to
Yeah.
change faster, etc. So I think that does work. So I think there is still opportunities and appetite for investment, right? I think that is still there, but it's not, it's different. I think it's different, and it's at a different different pace as well.
But I go back to, and we've had Infornexus on the show, and they're going to be speaking. I'm speaking to them at TPM too, because I think it's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting time to be talking to them. They are a company that when I first started covering this space, they were considered the upstart, and they were the ones who had to change the way people thought about process and the way people thought about buying tech. And they had to convince a whole group in the industry that cloud was okay to use to manage your, international supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, and it's funny to go back to that. Like, I do think obviously the industry changes, right? And each
Yeah.
kind of 5 to 10 year generation that comes in is making decisions based on what their experience with tech outside of the industry is and what they know doesn't work and all that. But I and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I still see a industry that is very methodical in how it actually invests. So you may have if I'm a shipper and I'm in a investment cycle, I may have a lot of conversations with people like you and companies that I never would have talked to 4 years ago, but I'm not going to have a conversation with you today and spend 6 figures tomorrow, right? Like, that's just not how
No,
this is going to work,
no,
right? So
no, true.
yeah,
No, no.
so
But
yeah, I yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, and I think also the thing what is different is that I think a lot of companies underestimate is the power of the big parties in the industry and the amount of stakeholders that are involved.
Yeah,
It's not just the shipper or the logistics director. It is the people in the plant that actually have to use software on a day-to-day basis and have to change
right,
their process. There are
right,
logistic service providers that need to play game as well. There's so many people. That's why logistics is so complex because there's so many different parties involved. And
right,
then also when you're talking about the international landscape, it's even more. And then you have the big, larger freight forwarders or the carriers, etc., that have a massive power in the industry as well. And they hold a lot of power over the shippers as well. And that's what we just said. I think that's now changing because, of course, people have a choice and rates are going down, etc., etc. So I think that comes with a lot of opportunities for tech as well.
yeah. Well, what do you think? What do you think the outlook for 24 looks like?
I don't have a crystal ball, but
No one does. I
no
I
one
won't
does.
hold you
I
to
don't know.
it. I promise.
I hear mixed, yeah, mixed feedback from the industries. Yeah, so I think it will still for TMS. I think it will look pretty strong because companies need to reduce on costs. They need to still create more transparency on data. We even have customers now that are looking at the TMS, or companies that are looking at the TMS because they for the CO2 emission reporting, etc. So they just
Right.
need to have something in place for particular just that, and that's their selling point to their management, which
Yep.
makes it quite interesting.
Yep.
So I think for tech, I think there's still yeah a lot of opportunities. Yeah.
I think you hit upon something, and part of the thing that I think is going to be interesting to watch in 24 is you hit upon the cost of resources, right? Um,
Hmm.
I really think companies are thinking about 24 about the way they get their cost structure, whether you're a shipper, especially if you're a 3PL and you have to,
Hmm.
you're essentially arbitrage of buy and sell, and that's not just on freight, but on the technology side too, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can you how can you invest in tech in such a way that you can manage resources, human resources, a lot more efficiently? Because that to a certain extent, the pandemic, it went out the window, right? Especially, I mean, North America, it's still like our unemployment rate is crazy low right now still, and it
Yeah.
costs a lot to onboard someone, and especially if you want someone talented, right? Like I know you're facing this. You're growing in North America, right? So
Yeah.
to me, I think that's the big metric is like, how can you as a software provider not just say we'll do this better, but how can you show that you can control resources for the person that's investing in you? So
Hmm.
yeah. Um,
No, no, but I think that's the massive issue in US and Europe. What we're seeing a lot of our customers that struggle with that and have changed the whole way how they operate their logistics. We're seeing way more companies setting up control towers in more cost efficient places, and control
mm,
towers only work if you have either somebody to run it for you or if you have software to actually manage that.
mm, right.
So I
So it's
think
one
that
or
is
the other.
something that is, yeah,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, yeah, correct. But as for us as a company, as a tech startup or scale up as well, right? If you look at if you want to grow and you have to invest in salespeople, same as like the freight forwarders as well. If you want to invest in salespeople, yeah, it's not cheap,
Yeah. You're 10 years old. You
right?
can't call yourself a startup anymore. So,
No, I know.
um,
Sorry, sorry, sorry,
you're
sorry.
11 next year. It's great.
I can tell you,
Uh,
we've never called ourselves a startup from the beginning,
no,
but
I know you
that's also
haven't. I
because
know you
we.
haven't.
No, I never either. I never put the title CEO on my business card for the first, I think, 7 years. It was always VP of global business strategy.
Your
Yeah, because
head was
otherwise,
locked.
if the CEO is going to be doing the sales and talking to customers, they're going to think like, who else is running the company, right? So,
That's true.
yeah,
That is true. Yeah. Well, okay. So real quickly, two more questions. One, you know, I alluded to how many solutions are in the market just in TMS, but across the board in Logtech, it's like I've given up on trying to cover every single company in the space because it's just I would like there's not enough hours in the day for me to do it. So, how do
yeah,
you sort of cut through that noisy market, especially when a lot of companies do have a you know a big tranche of money to spend on marketing?
yeah. So actually, surprisingly, most of our sales actually come through referrals from
Okay.
existing customers. So that's actually, I think that's something that we uh, differentiate ourselves with a very clear message behind me to get shit done. We don't sell smoke and mirrors. We tell customers or potential companies potential customers what we can do, but also what we cannot do. Because otherwise, if you don't meet expectations, you're gonna get
Yeah.
they're gonna figure it out sooner or later anyway.
True.
So I
True.
think that is something, and also in the TMS, but also on the freight procurement side, don't underestimate the power of the logistics service provider. The logistics service provider actually, um, they like working with what we do, and they actually also recommend us to potential customers. And I think that's the yeah. If your business grows through, of course, we have a sales team in place as well, but through referrals from existing customers, I think that is the best compliment that you can have.
Yeah. Um, there's a lot
Does
of
that answer your
companies.
question?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
there's a lot of companies I think in various categories that have taken that approach, right? And at this point in the market, it seems like a very sustainable way to have built things.
Yeah.
It's fun for me to observe all the different ways companies sort of like try to get their name out and build. So for me, there's no necessarily absolute right or wrong way for, you know, it's very company dependent, very sector dependent, geographic.
Yeah.
Um, okay, we are running out of time. I could talk all day about this stuff, but I have a beach to get back out to, and
Yeah. No.
you
No.
probably have to get to sleep at some point. So, um, I ask this of every guest. You have to tell me who your favorite band or musician is and why.
Yeah, I thought about that. At
This
this
is
moment, as
this is
you,
always the toughest
sorry.
question for everybody. So,
Yeah, no, I know, no, no. But if what's currently playing at our house, we have a 7 year old, right? So we're playing Dutch children's songs. So it's a Dutch artist that from my time that actually, so I can actually sing the songs along. So this morning at 7 o'clock, I was walking in East Coast Park here in Singapore at the beach, actually singing a Dutch children's song from Herman van Veen, and actually my daughter actually found it quite amusing. So if it makes her smile, then that's good, right?
that is good. Yeah, if that happy child,
It's not
happy
not about the
life.
quality of the singing, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's
Well, this will. I keep threatening to make a Spotify playlist of all my guests' favorite songs, and that would be a very interesting one to add to all the
oh,
other
this will
ones
be
that I like,
definitely it'll be a game changer,
like
definitely, yeah,
Jay Z and Led Zeppelin, and then all of a sudden, so you have to tell me,
yeah.
send me one that I can include on that list. Okay.
Yes, okay, I will.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Wiebe, thank you so much. This has been great chat. Always, I knew it would be great to chat with you on the show, and thanks so much for making time. Have a very prosperous 2024 and happy holidays.
Thank you, same to you, and enjoy your time in Cancun.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye bye. All right. Well, thanks to Wiebe for making some time today. I probably still pronounce his name wrong, even after 5 years of knowing him. All right, just about to wrap up. Last dad joke of 2023. We're still in 2023, right? Yeah. All right. What do you call this? Is from my brother-in-law, so I'll send you his email if you don't like this. What do you call a diet where you wear winter gloves? Intermittent fasting. But I mean, I'm on a beach. I don't need mittens right now. But if I was back home in DC, I definitely would need gloves. So it's a holiday appropriate joke, I guess. But so again, it was intermittent fasting. If you want to tell that at your holiday party or family gathering over the next couple of days, you're welcome to it. And if you have any complaints, just let me know, and I'll get you my brother-in-law's email address. Thank you to Wiebe. Thank you to all of you for making 2023 a splendid year in every single way for our show. Thank you to Nicole, the greatest show producer in the world, who had a baby a couple months ago, and so happy for her. Congrats again, Nicole, and hope 2024 is awesome for everybody. Thanks to Sarah and the Let's Talk Supply Chain team. You make my life so easy and so fun to do this. Wouldn't be able to do this without you. Hopefully, I will see you all at an event. TPM, I'll be at Manifest, I'll be at Break Bulk, I'll be at probably a dozen events next year. So hopefully I'll see you in person. If not, reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, SMS, WhatsApp, email. There's a million ways to find me. Would love to catch up and talk on the phone, email, or grab a coffee or a drink if you're ever in the DC area. Just let me know. Thank you so much to everyone for supporting the show, and have a great 2024. Bye.